In the spring of 1944, German intelligence officers in Berlin met around a table filled with photos, intercepted messages, and reports. They were not watching Allied troops or supplies. They were focused on one man. His name was George S. Patton. The Germans were desperate to know where he would go next. For months, they spent more effort tracking Patton than any other Allied commander. It was not Eisenhower, even though he was in charge of the entire Allied operation. It was not Montgomery, who had fought across North Africa. One American general drew more attention from German intelligence than anyone else. That man was George S. Patton. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the highest-ranking German commander in Western Europe, followed Patton's movements very closely. Any report that mentioned Patton's location was treated as extremely important. Rundstedt had faced many of the best Allied generals before. He had seen their strategies and learned their habits. But Patton stood apart from the rest. He was unpredictable, aggressive, and dangerous. More than anything else, Patton frightened him. The Germans first came face-to-face with Patton in November 1942 during Operation Torch. This was the Allied invasion of North Africa. Patton was in command of the Western Task Force. His job was to land American troops along the coast of Morocco. About 35,000 U.S. soldiers came ashore under his command. This operation was the first major ground battle fought by the United States against Axis forces in World War II. Because of that, German commanders watched it very closely. They always studied enemy generals. They looked for patterns in how they fought. They searched for weaknesses and habits they could use to their advantage. What they saw in Patton worried them right away. He moved quickly, much faster than American generals were expected to move. The U.S. Army had a reputation for slow, careful advances, supported by massive firepower. Patton did not fight that way. He pushed forward aggressively, took risks, and refused to slow down. This made him dangerous and unpredictable in the eyes of the Germans. In just 3 days, Patton had taken control of Casablanca and accepted the French surrender. His troops moved so quickly that German observers were completely surprised. They were not used to seeing American forces advance at that speed. This sudden success caught the attention of Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, who commanded German forces in the Mediterranean. He asked his intelligence officers to gather as much information as possible about this American general. He wanted to know who Patton was, where he came from, and how he thought. The reports that came back were deeply unsettling to German commanders. They learned that Patton had spent his entire military career studying German warfare. He read German military books and theories in their original language. He had traveled to the battlefields of World War I in France and walked the same ground where German armies had nearly broken through Allied lines. Patton did not just fight the Germans, he understood them. He knew how they planned, how they moved, and how they thought about war. In many ways, he understood German operational thinking better than most German officers themselves. In February 1943, German forces led by Field Marshal Erwin Rommel launched a major attack at the Kasserine Pass in Tunisia. The assault hit the American lines hard. Inexperienced U.S. troops were overwhelmed and began to retreat in panic. Units broke apart, equipment was abandoned, and confusion spread quickly across the battlefield. This defeat was the worst loss American ground forces would suffer during the entire war. For the Germans, it was a moment of success and confirmation of their beliefs about the Americans. German commanders watched closely to see what would happen next. They wanted to know how the United States would react to such a disaster. Would the Americans pull back and play it safe? Would they remove their generals and change their leadership? Or would the defeat shake their confidence so badly that they would lose their nerve altogether? The answer came in early March. George Patton was given command of the U.S. Second Corps, the broken American force that had collapsed at Kasserine Pass. Many believed the damage was too great to fix quickly. What happened next shocked German intelligence officers who were watching the front lines. In less than 2 weeks, Patton completely changed the situation. He imposed strict discipline, demanded high standards, and restored order. The same soldiers who had once run from the battlefield were now standing their ground. Their confidence returned, morale improved rapidly. Units that had been considered ineffective and broken suddenly became aggressive and eager to fight. To the Germans, this rapid transformation was alarming. It showed that the Americans had not lost their will to fight. Under Patton's leadership, they had become dangerous once again. German reconnaissance units soon reported a clear change on the battlefield. American patrols were now pushing forward, testing German lines with an aggression and confidence that had not been seen before. These were no longer hesitant or cautious movements. They were bold and determined. Even Field Marshal Erwin Rommel noticed the difference. He wrote in his diary that American forces had suddenly become much more dangerous. This shift worried him. The change had happened too quickly to be explained by fresh troops or better equipment. There had been no major reinforcements and no dramatic increase in firepower. Something else had changed. There was only one explanation. A new commander had taken control. George Patton was now leading the Americans, and the Germans could feel his presence on the battlefield. In July 1943, the Allies invaded Sicily. The island was the gateway to mainland Italy. The original plan was for the British Eighth Army, led by General Montgomery, to take the main role. They would advance up the eastern coast toward Messina. Patton's U.S. Seventh Army was supposed to protect Montgomery's flank. Patton did not stick to that plan. Instead, he pushed his forces hard across the western half of Sicily. His advance was so fast that it surprised everyone, including his own officers. His soldiers moved farther and faster than any Allied force had done before in the war. German units trying to escape across the Strait of Messina suddenly found themselves in trouble. They had expected a slow, predictable advance. Instead, Patton was moving so quickly that their escape routes were at risk. Units that thought they had days to withdraw now had only hours. The evacuation became chaotic as German commanders rushed to get their men out before Patton could cut them off. When Patton reached Messina, he arrived before Montgomery, even though he had started farther away. In just 39 days, Patton's army had crossed about 200 miles while fighting the entire time. German after-action reports described the campaign with both respect and real concern. One officer wrote that Patton fought like a German panzer commander, not like an American infantry general. He took risks that American doctrine did not normally allow. He attacked weaknesses before defenders could react. In the end, what frightened the Germans most was this simple fact: Patton fought like they did. In August 1943, at the height of his success in Sicily, Patton visited 2 American evacuation hospitals. What happened during those visits nearly ended his career and unexpectedly gave the Germans hope. At the hospitals, Patton met soldiers who were suffering from what was then called combat fatigue. Today, it would be recognized as severe stress from constant fighting. Patton did not understand this condition. He believed these men were cowards who had abandoned their fellow soldiers. In a moment of anger, he slapped one soldier across the face. About a week later, he slapped another soldier. This time, he also pulled out his pistol and threatened the man. News of these incidents quickly reached General Dwight Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander. Eisenhower was furious. When the story leaked to the press, it caused a major scandal. The general, who had just led a brilliant campaign, was suddenly under attack at home. Members of Congress demanded that Patton be sent back to the United States in disgrace. Newspapers published editorials saying he was unfit to command troops. His reputation was in serious danger. German intelligence followed the controversy very closely. They believed Patton was the most dangerous American commander on the battlefield. Now it seemed the Americans might remove him themselves. German officers could hardly believe their good fortune. But Eisenhower did not fire Patton. Instead, he issued a harsh reprimand and kept him in the army. This decision worried the Germans. It showed that, despite the scandal, the Americans still valued Patton. To German intelligence, this meant only one thing: Patton was likely being saved for something important. By early 1944, Patton had been removed from active combat command. He was sent to England, where he appeared to be waiting without a clear role. German intelligence watched his movements closely and almost obsessively. They knew Patton was in England. They also knew he was not openly commanding any of the Allied forces that seemed likely to take part in the coming invasion of Europe. This raised an important question for them. What was Patton really doing? German intelligence officers came to a clear conclusion. They believed Patton must be in charge of the main invasion force. To them, it made perfect sense. The Americans would never assign their most aggressive and successful general to a minor or secondary operation. Wherever Patton was, that had to be where the real attack would take place. What the Germans did not know was that the 1st United States Army Group was not real. It existed only on paper and in fake radio traffic. Its tanks were made of inflatable rubber. Its headquarters buildings were nothing more than painted plywood. The massive army the Germans feared existed only in their imagination. This was the greatest deception operation of the war. It succeeded for one simple reason: the Germans believed completely in Patton. They were convinced that wherever he went, the main Allied attack would follow. German high command became certain that this army would land at Pas-de-Calais, the shortest crossing point across the English Channel. They placed their strongest defenses there. They stationed their best reserve forces there, and they waited for Patton there, unaware that the real invasion would strike somewhere else entirely. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy. The invasion took place about 150 miles southwest of Pas-de-Calais, the location the Germans expected most. The attack Hitler had feared for years had finally begun. But German commanders were unsure how to respond. They questioned whether this was the real invasion or only a diversion. They worried it might be designed to draw German forces south, while the main attack, led by Patton, would strike later at Pas-de-Calais. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt wanted to release the German panzer reserves immediately. He believed a fast counterattack could push the Allies back into the sea while they were still weak, but the order never came. Hitler and his senior staff believed the Normandy landings might be a feint. They were convinced the true invasion force, supposedly commanded by Patton, could arrive at any moment at Pas-de-Calais. Because of this belief, they refused to move their strongest armored divisions. For 6 critical weeks, German panzer divisions remained in place near Pas-de-Calais. They waited for an attack that never came. These were the very units that could have crushed the Normandy beachhead during its most vulnerable early days. All of those divisions stayed frozen because of one man. The Germans simply could not believe that the Americans would fight the most important battle of the war without George Patton leading it. On August 1, 1944, George Patton finally returned to combat command. He was given control of the U.S. Third Army and sent into the fighting in Normandy. The Germans had been expecting this moment for months. Now Patton was on the battlefield, and he was about to confirm every fear they had about him. In just the first 2 weeks of August, the Third Army advanced farther than any other Allied force had managed in the previous 2 months. Patton's divisions moved at incredible speed. They pushed west through Brittany and then turned east toward Paris. German units that had held strong defensive positions for weeks suddenly discovered American forces behind them. Their supply routes were cut, their headquarters were threatened. Entire formations found themselves outflanked and surrounded before they even realized what was happening. The German command system in western France began to collapse. Units lost contact with their leaders. Orders conflicted with one another. Commanders no longer knew where the front line was because Patton kept pushing it forward faster than anyone could track. Field Marshal Günther von Kluge, who had replaced Rundstedt as the senior German commander in the West, sent increasingly desperate messages to Berlin. Reports said the same thing again and again. The American Third Army seemed to be everywhere at once. Each time German forces tried to form a new defensive line, Patton's army was already past it. The situation spiraled out of control. What the Germans had feared for years was now happening in real time. By mid-August 1944, Patton saw a chance to end the fighting in France with one decisive move. German armies were retreating through a narrow escape route near the town of Falaise. If the Allies could close this gap, hundreds of thousands of German soldiers would be trapped with no way out. Patton immediately pushed his forces north toward Falaise. At the same time, Canadian and Polish units advanced south. Slowly, the gap began to close. The trap tightened with every passing day. Inside the pocket, German units fell into chaos. Panic spread quickly. Soldiers abandoned tanks, trucks, and artillery and tried to escape on foot. Officers lost control of their men. Communication broke down, and organized resistance collapsed. The destruction inside the Falaise pocket was overwhelming. More than 50,000 German soldiers were captured, and an estimated 10,000 were killed. The loss of equipment was even worse. The German army in France lost most of its tanks, artillery, and transport vehicles. German officers who survived later said the defeat was worse than Stalingrad. At Stalingrad, they explained, there had been time to prepare and organize. At Falaise, Patton gave them no time at all. After the war ended, Allied intelligence officers questioned many captured German generals. They asked them about the Allied commanders they had faced. Which generals did they respect? Which ones did they fear the most? The answers were surprisingly consistent. When German officers spoke about General Montgomery, they said he was predictable. He planned carefully and moved slowly. They usually knew what he would do next, and that made him easier to fight. When they talked about General Bradley, they described him as capable but cautious. He avoided risks. Because of this, German commanders could often guess his next move and prepare their defenses in advance. Patton was different. When German generals spoke about him, their tone changed. They used words like unpredictable, aggressive, and dangerous. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt said that Patton was the Allied general he feared the most. General Fritz Bayerlein, who commanded the Panzer Lehr Division, said Patton was the only Allied commander who truly had the instincts of a German armored leader. The Germans had respected Rommel because he was bold and unconventional, and they saw those same qualities in Patton. Patton did not fight by the rulebook. He made decisions faster than his enemies could react. He understood that war was about speed, shock, and violence, not slow planning and cautious advances. In December 1944, Germany launched its final major offensive of the war. A massive attack poured through the Ardennes forest, an area the Allies believed was unlikely to be used for a large assault. The attack caught Allied commanders completely by surprise. Within days, American forces were pushed back. Confusion spread along the front. One of the most serious moments came when the 101st Airborne Division was surrounded in the town of Bastogne. The situation was critical, and time was running out. General Eisenhower quickly called an emergency meeting in Verdun. He gathered his senior commanders and asked a direct question. How soon could they launch a counterattack to stop the German advance? Most generals answered cautiously. They spoke of weeks of preparation. Moving large armies was complex. Roads were crowded, supplies had to be redirected, and units needed time to reposition. They explained that rushing an attack would be impossible. Then Patton gave his answer. He said he could attack in 48 hours. He claimed he could move 3 divisions and strike the Germans within 2 days. The room fell silent. Other generals thought Patton was showing off. What he proposed seemed impossible. You could not simply turn an entire army 90 degrees and attack along a completely new direction in just 48 hours. The logistical challenges alone should have taken weeks. But Patton was not bluffing. He had already prepared for this exact situation. His intelligence officer, Colonel Oscar Koch, had predicted a German attack through the Ardennes when most others believed it could not happen. While others dismissed the idea, Patton had quietly made plans in advance. Patton had quietly prepared backup plans for exactly this kind of situation. While others focused on the current front, he had already thought through what to do if the Germans attacked somewhere else. When the attack finally came, Patton was ready. He made a single phone call. That was all it took. Within hours, the U.S. Third Army began turning north. More than 250,000 soldiers, along with tens of thousands of vehicles, started moving across icy winter roads. They did this in brutal weather and completed the shift in just 48 hours. The Germans were stunned. They had expected it would take weeks before the Allies could mount a serious counterattack. Instead, Patton was already striking their southern flank almost immediately. On December 26th, Patton's forces broke through and relieved the surrounded troops at Bastogne. The German offensive, which had been designed to split the Allied armies in half, was stopped. After the war, German generals were asked what had gone wrong during the Battle of the Bulge. Many of them gave the same answer. They had not expected Patton to move so fast. They believed they had more time. They were wrong. From the first day they faced Patton in North Africa to the final days of the war, the Germans repeatedly underestimated how quickly he could act. And every time they made that mistake, they paid for it. Why did German generals fear Patton more than any other Allied commander? The answer is simple. He thought the way they did. German military doctrine was built around speed, aggression, and exploiting enemy weaknesses. These ideas formed the foundation of Blitzkrieg, the style of warfare that had crushed Poland, defeated France, and nearly destroyed the Soviet Union. German commanders understood this kind of war instinctively. It was how they had been trained to fight. Patton understood it as well. He had spent decades studying German tactics and strategy. He didn't just read about them, he absorbed their way of thinking. When Patton commanded an army, he fought in a way German generals recognized immediately. In many cases, he fought the way they wished they could fight themselves. But there was more to it than that. German commanders could usually predict what Allied generals would do. They understood American and British military systems. They knew the doctrine. They expected careful planning, heavy firepower, and slow advances. This made Allied moves easier to anticipate. Patton did not follow those rules. He attacked when doctrine said to defend. He moved when others would wait. He struck before his enemy was ready. That unpredictability, combined with speed and aggression, is what truly frightened the German commanders. Patton kept moving forward even when his supply officers told him to stop. He took risks that worried his own commanders and terrified his enemies. The Germans never knew what Patton would do next. They only knew that when he acted, it would be fast, violent, and costly for them. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the man who commanded German forces on D-Day and who had faced the best Allied generals, summed it up clearly after the war. He said that Patton was the supreme master of mobile warfare. He called him a brilliant offensive commander and the Allied general the Germans feared most. From the deserts of North Africa to the forests of the Ardennes, George Patton earned that fear. He earned it battle by battle and victory by victory. Again and again, he achieved results that seemed impossible. In the end, the German generals who had once conquered Europe learned what it was like to face a commander who fought exactly the way they did, only better.